Picture yourself standing on the corner of Mulberry and Bayard Street in Manhattan in the sweltering summer of 1900. You might expect to see the glamorous New York of the Gilded Age, with its top hats and horse-drawn carriages, but you have stepped into a living hell on earth. The smell hits you first, a physical wall of stench composed of rotting garbage, unwashed human bodies, horse manure, and stagnant sewage that makes your eyes water instantly. You are standing in the heart of the Lower East Side, specifically the notorious Five Points and Mulberry Bend districts, where the population density is higher than that of Bombay or Calcutta. This is not a neighborhood. It is a human warehouse where 50,000 people are packed into a few city blocks, living in conditions that would kill a farm animal. The ground beneath your boots is not paved with gold, but covered in a thick, black slime of mud and excrement that never truly dries out in the shadows of the tenements. Look up at the buildings that loom over you, blocking out the sun and turning the street into a permanent twilight zone of gloom. These are the infamous dumbbell tenements, brick prisons designed by greedy landlords to squeeze the maximum amount of rent out of the desperate immigrant waves arriving at Ellis Island. You are about to walk inside one of these buildings, but I warn you, what you see will destroy any romantic notion you have about the good old days of American history. You step into the hallway, which is pitch black even at high noon, because there are no windows, and the gas jets are rarely lit to save money. The air is heavy and suffocating, carrying the distinct metallic taste of tuberculosis, which the locals call the white plague because it drains the blood and life from your face. You feel your way up the rickety wooden stairs, your hand touching the slimy residue on the banister that has been left by thousands of unwashed hands before you. You open the door to a typical apartment, a space that measures perhaps 10 by 12 feet, and your brain struggles to comprehend what you are seeing. In this single room, which serves as a kitchen, a workshop, and a bedroom, an entire family of 8 or 10 adults is trying to exist. There is no privacy here, no corner where you can be alone with your thoughts, only the crushing weight of other bodies pressing against you day and night. The people you see are not just family members. They are strangers known as boarders, who pay 5 cents a night for a spot on the floor. To make the rent, the tenant has to rent out every inch of floor space, meaning you might wake up with the foot of a total stranger in your face. The concept of a good night's sleep does not exist here, because the room operates in shifts, a practice known as hot bedding. As soon as one man gets up to go to his 12-hour shift at the docks or the factory, another exhausted soul lies down in the same warm, lice-infested spot to catch a few hours of rest. The mattress, if there is one, is black with grease and crawling with vermin that feast on the blood of the sleepers. You scratch your skin just thinking about it. But for these people, the itching is a constant torture that drives many to the brink of insanity. Now, let us talk about the plumbing, or rather, the complete and terrifying lack of it in these human hives. There are no toilets in these apartments, no running water, and certainly no showers to wash away the grime of the coal mines or the garment shops. If you need to relieve yourself in the middle of the winter night, you have to use a chamber pot in the corner of the room, right next to where people are eating and sleeping. In the morning, this pot is carried down 4 flights of stairs and dumped into a communal cesspool in the backyard, often right next to the water pump. The stench in the courtyard is so overpowering that it was said to knock a grown man unconscious if he stood there too long in the August heat. These privies were often overflowing, leaking raw human waste into the cellar, where the poorest of the poor actually lived. Yes, people lived in the cellars, underground caves with dirt floors that flooded every time it rained, turning their homes into swamps of sewage and mud. These cellar dwellers were the untouchables of New York, living in total darkness with the rats that scurried over their faces while they slept. But the horror of the tenement was not just the filth. It was the fact that the apartment was also a factory. You see men and women hunched over sewing machines or tables, making cigars and artificial flowers by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. This is the sweatshop system, where dangerous chemicals and flammable fabrics are piled high in the same room where food is cooked. The air is filled with toxic dust and tobacco particles that coat the lungs, ensuring that almost everyone you meet has a chronic, hacking cough. If a fire breaks out, and it often does, these buildings become death traps with wooden stairs that burn like kindling and fire escapes that collapse under the weight of the panic. There is no escape, and the fire department is often too slow or too corrupt to save the residents of the slum. But let us step back out onto the street, because the nightlife in the slum offers a different kind of horror for the adults trying to drown their sorrows. You walk down to a basement dive bar known as a stale beer dive, the lowest form of entertainment in the history of the city. Here, for 2 cents, you can buy a mug of stale beer, which is the dregs collected from the kegs of legitimate bars and mixed with unknown chemicals to make it bubble again. The patrons here are the bums and the outcasts, sitting on benches or lying on the sawdust floor in a stupor of cheap alcohol and despair. In some of these dives, you do not even pay for a bed. You pay to lean on a rope stretched across the room. This is the famous 2-penny hangover, where men slump over a rope to sleep upright, and in the morning, the barkeep simply cuts the rope to wake everyone up. Violence in these places is explosive and random, with knives and brass knuckles settling arguments over a spilled drink or a perceived insult. The police rarely enter these places unless they are coming to collect their bribe money from the owners. Corruption is the law of the land, run by the political machine of Tammany Hall that profits from the misery of the slum. They ignore the illegal brothels, the gambling dens, and the unlicensed liquor spots as long as the payoff arrives on time every week. Walk further down the street to Bandit's Roost, an alleyway that even the toughest cops are afraid to enter alone. Here, criminal gangs with names like the Plug Uglies and the Dead Rabbits rule the pavement with absolute brutality. If you are an adult walking home with your week's wages in your pocket, you are a target, and a brick to the back of the head is the standard greeting. There is no 911 to call, no ambulance coming to save you. You are on your own in a jungle made of brick and cobblestone. But perhaps the most disgusting aspect of the street is not the crime, but the dead horses that are left to rot where they fall. In 1900, New York relied on horses for transport, and when a horse died of exhaustion, it was often left in the street for days until it bloated and exploded in the heat. You would have to step over the rotting carcass of a 1,200-pound animal just across the street to buy a loaf of bread. The flies from these carcasses would then swarm into the open windows of the tenements, spreading typhoid and cholera to the food on the table. It is a biological cycle of death that connects the street, the home, and the body in a loop of sickness. Now, imagine the summer heat wave, when the brick buildings absorb the sun all day and radiate it back at night like a pizza oven. The temperature inside the rooms can reach 110 degrees, making sleep impossible and turning the air into a suffocating blanket. To survive, thousands of adults drag their bedding out onto the fire escapes or the roofs, sleeping precariously high above the concrete. Every summer, the newspapers report the tragic stories of exhausted men and women rolling over in their sleep and falling 5 stories to their deaths. It is a grim lottery where you risk gravity to escape the heat, and sometimes you lose. In the winter, the situation reverses, and the lack of insulation turns the apartments into ice boxes where water freezes in the pitcher. People burn anything they can find, old furniture, rags, garbage, in the stove just to keep from freezing to death in their own beds. The smoke from these fires adds to the smog that hangs over the city, a toxic gray cloud that blocks out the stars permanently. You might wonder, how did the rest of the world not know about this? How did the rich on Fifth Avenue ignore this suffering? They simply did not look. until a man named Jacob Riis walked into these dark hallways with a camera and a new invention called flash powder. He took photos that exploded with light, capturing the terrified, dirty faces of the slum dwellers in their natural habitat. When he published his book, How the Other Half Lives, it shocked the conscience of the nation. But for the people living there, it was just another Tuesday. You look into the eyes of the men in those photos and you see a hardness, a survival instinct that has stripped away all softness and joy. They look 40 years older than they actually are, their bodies worn down by malnutrition, hard labor, and the constant stress of survival. They are the fuel that is burning to power the American industrial engine, consumed and discarded without a second thought. This is the secret history of New York that is scrubbed from the tourist brochures and the romantic movies. It was a place where human dignity was stripped away by the sheer mathematics of overcrowding and greed. The melting pot was actually a pressure cooker, and for 50,000 people in this slum, the pressure was lethal. As you walk away from the Lower East Side, wiping the grime from your face and trying to get the smell out of your nose, remember this reality. The skyscrapers of New York are built on a foundation of bone and sweat from the people who lived in the most disgusting slum in the world. It is a testament to the strength of the human animal that anyone survived this environment at all, let alone built a future from it. So the next time you complain about a small apartment or a delayed subway train, think of the hot bedding and the bucket system. Think of the stale beer dives and the air shafts filled with garbage. Be grateful for the modern world, because the past was a place where only the strongest survived the night.